You look at Britain, you look at the European Union, you look at any modern first class nation, and they're making cuts to their defense spending, and most of these nations don't necessarily have aerospace programs, but this whole idea of it being tied into this military sovereignty as a political agenda tool is kind of significant that way. It's going to have to take hits eventually, but it's interesting. I was interning up on the Hill here in Salt Lake City last year, and one of the senators, or U.S. senators, Bob Bennett, was talking about the cuts to our ATK programs and the contracts there that were through NASA, and the various negative feedback we were getting from the administration, who, as we've established, is not at all friendly to the military-industrial complex or aerospace defense. And that way, and what Senator Bennett was making a statement about getting back jobs in high tech and in Utah specifically, and the Obama administration has made these comments that they want high tech jobs and etc. It seems kind of contradictory that they're actually cutting contracts and programs that support the high tech aerospace industry, and NASA as a tool for that. So looking at that, and his comment is you have to find a balance. He talked about a trick they used to do in old aeronautics circuses, where you'd walk the wing, kind of a circus act, where you'd have to walk the wing, and you'd use these wires to get across the wing of a moving airplane, and you couldn't really do it unless you slide one way or the other. And so his idea was that you needed to balance a program such that you're not veering too far by putting too much money into it when you're lacking a lot of funds and revenue, like we are in the recession. And at the other end, if you shut down these programs completely by cutting off programs that are in the middle of operations, that have programs that haven't been completed, then you're going to cause a huge deficit of technology and startup capital later on. If you shut them down now, it's kind of like turning off the drain, and all the water just dissipates, and it's hard to get that pump flowing again, was his statement. So if you cut it off completely, you're in real trouble. And that's kind of the direction that seems that the Obama administration is heading right now, is cutting it off largely completely in the middle of programs starting up. So that seems contradictory to this idea that we want to go back to the moon and we want to go back to Mars with manned space flights. If that's a goal, it should be made, some of it a priority, with consistent funding throughout, not major cutbacks. So those are some things to consider there. Looking at the space program as a domestic tool for the domestic agenda, and looking at this idea that, and once again, this is liberals and Democrats arguing that the space program is going to be replaced by privatization, and that's usually a Republican or conservative argument. Oh yeah, this will be privatized by small businesses and industry. Now, when you look at this, this contradicts a fundamental duty of government, which is establishing infrastructure, which NASA has been all about, creating a bridge to space as a technology front, as a front for commerce, energy, different things like that. I mean, looking at the idea of infrastructure, the government and NASA should be a large component in that. I mean, space tourism doesn't seem like it's going to be establishing much more than what's already been developed. I mean, there's a few nuances that can be created, but they don't have the mass of resources, and they don't have a fungible goal yet. And what I mean by that is there's no revenue per se to be found in space at the moment, except other than tourism, and that's not a viable resource. You're not actually making something new. You're taking advantage of wealthy people's discretionary funds. And is that really building anything? It just seems the money needs to be going towards more fungible projects. If you look at the idea of sending a mission to the moon to look into the prospects for helium-3 fusion, there's a lot of minerals that are extrinsic to the Earth that might be discovered on planets right in our local solar system. And using those might actually help us develop new technologies for manufacturing, for energy, in the case of the helium-3, an extremely clean and powerful source of atomic energy. Definitely could be used for revamping this whole idea of green technology at a more sustainable level and more powerful level. So that's something to consider on infrastructure. It's this idea that one of government's fundamental duties is to make this basis for commerce and for technology. There has to be a level playing field or an access to these frontiers. Space tourism still seems in its infancy, and it doesn't have a teleological end goal. And that would seem to be a very important point to make, is that NASA and the U.S. government still needs to be that bridging factor, in my opinion. Other things to consider on this political issue, let me go over that again. This idea of the military-industrial complex. There's this great conflict between funding the space program because it's not providing anything that's fungible or technological. But if you look at it, the idea of competition with China and these other powers is going to be resolved through high tech in space. If you look, the issue of Star Wars, started back in Reagan's administration. Even before then, they had programs looking at installing military structures in space for taking on the nuclear issue by either making shields or defense structures that would shoot down ICBMs and other nuclear weapons that go in strategic weapons. By creating that kind of structure, it creates all kinds of conflict. People don't want to, per se, insinuate another kind of Cold War arms race that's in space, and there's a lot of hesitancy about that. But I have the feeling that the United States, for all her hesitancy and her other military issues that are more associated with nation building and all these other projects, needs to be thinking on the cutting edge that way, because I don't feel that China or Russia or other nations looking into space development or strategic weapons are really going to have all that hesitancy about gaining an advantage. When you have the United States nuclear weapons arsenal, with that kind of edge, you need to keep it sustainable. And the idea of keeping a shield, creating a shield either through space or land-based units, which NASA is definitely going to be involved in that way, and developing technology for that, is something to consider for that.
Thanks for watching the show. Before we go, we'd like to leave you with a few thoughts.
There is no denying that the space program has benefited the United States in many ways. It has established us as a world superpower, and the spin-off technologies has benefited both the private and the federal sector.
Also, with the cancellation of the Constellation program, more than 2,000 jobs have been lost here in Utah alone. These are high-paying, high-prestige, high-tech jobs. And so we ask the current administration, does it really matter where these high-tech jobs are?
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
For space science, like nuclear science and all technology, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war.